Good evening, sir. Good evening, madam. Today we are presenting a general cup on the topic effect of antenatal oral vitamin D supplementation on serum 25 hydroxy concentration in exclusively breastfed infants at 6 months of age. It's a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, and this is done by Prashant Prabhakar et al. From the Department of Pediatrics and the Department of OBG from the University College of Medical Science, Guru Tegh Bahadur Hospital, Delhi. It is published in Indian Pediatrics at June 15, 2024 in volume 61. And they have done the study as there is high prevalence of vitamin D deficiency among pregnant women, that is 44 to 66%, and lactating mothers 70 to 80%, and also infants 42 to 74% due to dietary and lifestyle changes. So the maternal vitamin deficiency can increase the risk of preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, and fetal growth restriction. And also in infants, it leads to rickets and long-term diseases like type 1 diabetes, neurological diseases, and respiratory illnesses. So when we give prenatal vitamin D supplementation, it reduces the risk of small for gestational age babies without any adverse effect. So, if we are giving antenatal vitamin D in pregnant mothers, it can increase the vitamin D stores in the newborn, and hence it can be helping for the infant. In the breast milk, the low anti-ratic activity in the breast milk leads to vitamin D deficient state in the exclusively breastfed child. They have done a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial in a tertiary care teaching hospital, and the participants were pregnant women aged between 90 to 35 years, and they were residing within 10 kilometers of the hospital, and gestation age between 30 to 32 weeks, who were spontaneously conceived and having specific height, weight, and health parameters. And there were exclusion criteria for mothers. It includes chronic illness like TB, seizure disorder, diabetes mellitus, CKD, chronic liver disease, hyperparathyroidism, hypothyroidism, etc. And also mothers who received extra additional vitamin D supplementation in the last 3 months, apart from the standard prenatal supplementation. And for the neonates, the inclusion criteria were gestational age between 37 to 40, that is term baby, who is AGA, and Apgar score more than 7 at 1 minute, and who are having no gross congenital anomalies at birth. And exclusion criteria for neonates include neonates who developed seizures, sepsis, birth asphyxia, or who required extended transfusion, and also infants who received vitamin supplementation in infancy period also excluded. So the randomization is done by a computer-generated randomization sequence, and to receive either group receive a cholecalciferol coded as A or placebo coded as B in capsule form, which were identical in appearance and smell. The drug and placebo were coded as A and B, and is serially numbered from 1 to 100. That is the third person who is not associated with the study, and it is allocated to the groups by serially numbered opaque sealed envelope. That is NOS technique. And here the participants, researchers, and those involved in the data collection were likely blinded to which the treatment each group is received. And the decoding and data analysis was done in 2 steps. First, the serial numbers were converted either A or B, and the data analysis was done. And after the data results were available, the decoding is done as which group received A and which group received group B, which is placebo. So, at the recruitment, 3 ml of venous blood from each mother is taken for analysis of vitamin D, calcium, and alkaline phosphatase. And the control group were given 60,000 international units of vitamin D in a capsule form, and the other group were given inert sugar, which is identical in appearance and smell, and it is prepared from Mankind Pharmaceuticals. And the first dose was given diet supervision, and also subsequent doses weekly for 5 weeks were given, and also under diet supervision. Then at the time of birth, 3 ml of cord blood from the neonates are collected, and their anthropometric measures were taken and recorded. And the mothers were counseled to exclusively breastfeed their infants until 6 months of age. The exclusively breastfed means no other food, water, even water, and ORS, the vitamins, minerals, and medicinal syrups can be given. And also the mothers were counseled to expose the infant's surface area under sunlight for 15 minutes between 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and note the number of days of exposure per week in a chart. And each infant were followed up at 6, 10, 14 weeks for the twin vaccination, and at 6 months where the anthropometry and duration of sunlight exposure was recorded. Weekly sun index is calculated by body surface area exposed to sunlight into hours of exposure by week. And total sun index is equal to weekly sun index into total weeks of exposure. Then the cord and venous blood collected at birth and 6 months were estimated for calcium, phosphorus, vitamin D concentration, and alkaline phosphatase concentration. And the vitamin D concentration estimation was done by chemiluminescence immunoassay technique, which is highly sensitive. And digital radiograph of both wrist AP were obtained to detect radiological records like any presence of cupping, spraying, or fraying of the lower end of radius or ulna. Then serum alkaline phosphatase more than 420 international units per ml was considered as biochemical rickets, and they defined the vitamin D deficiency as less than 11 nanogram per ml, insufficiency as less than 20 nanogram per ml, and sufficiency more than 20 nanogram per ml. So the method was the pregnant women recruited at 30 to 32 weeks of pregnancy, and the randomization done by the computer-generated randomization technique, and each group, the control group received vitamin D in 5 weeks and diet supervision, and the placebo group were given inert sugar, which were identical in smell and appearance, and recruitment 3 ml of blood from the mothers were taken. From the vitamin D control group, 12 number were excluded by the exclusion criteria due to lost follow-up, IUGR, and sepsis, and exchange transfusion and prematurity, and also 14 from the placebo group. And the mother-infant diets, 38 were followed in the control group at 6, 10, 14 weeks and 6 months, and anthropometry measures were done, and 36 were in the placebo group, and at 6 months their serum vitamin D, calcium, phosphate, and ALP levels were measured also. X-ray of both wrist were taken, and from each group one is excluded, lost to follow. Then the sample size was calculated based on a study conducted at the same institution by Naik et al., in which the lactating mothers were supplemented with the 6 lakh international unit of vitamin D3 or placebo in the early postpartum period. So the statistical analysis was done by statistical package for social science version 20. Then quantitative variables were represented as mean and standard deviation or median and interquartile range. Like the quantitative variables like weight, height, BMI of the mothers, and calcium, phosphorus, and alkaline phosphatase levels in babies and mothers. These were represented as mean and standard deviation, and qualitative variables like dietary habits, dressing habit, educational status, etc. were represented as numbers and percentages. The normality of data were examined using box whisker plot and Shapiro-Wilk test. Then variables were compared between the two groups using unpaired students t-test, chi-square Fisher test, and Whitney U test. Then about the result, first the table showing characteristic demographic features of mothers of the two groups. These were comparable. The anthropometry, dietary habits, dressing habit, educational status, parity, etc. Of both the groups were comparable. And the demographic values of the mothers were also comparable, and it showed 90 90% of the pregnant mothers have insufficiency of vitamin D, that is less than 20 nanogram per ml, and 25% have severe deficiency, that is less than 11 nanogram per ml. So the next table showing the parameters of growth parameters of neonates at birth and 6 months of age. The growth parameters were comparable in the both groups. Then the biochemical profile of the neonates at birth and 6 months of age. The baseline the in the cord blood vitamin D levels, that is very higher, which were very higher in the cord blood, and also it is even maintained at the 6 months of age, that is 42 mean of 42 were present in the control group, and it is maintained at 31 in the after 6 months of age, and p value less than 0.001, and the proportion of child with insufficiency were 31% in the placebo group, that and 0 in the control group. It is also less than 0.001, and the proportion of infants with severe vitamin D deficiency were 22 in placebo group, and 19 even after the 6 months of age, and also five developed radiological or biochemical rickets in the placebo group. So in this randomized control study with 100 pregnant women, and they were given 60,000 international unit of vitamin D or placebo for the 5 weeks. And the possible confounders like maternal body mass index, baseline 25 levels, dietary habits, dressing preferences, and sun indexes were comparable in both groups. Even after that, there is a high prevalence of vitamin D deficiency. Their study revealed that there is high prevalence of vitamin D deficiency among pregnant women, as was observed in the previous studies from India and abroad. And the infants born to mothers who supplemented with vitamin D had a high levels of vitamin D in the cord blood, and also at even 6 months of age. And none of the infants born to the vitamin D supplemented mothers had severe vitamin D deficiency. And also if they have a high amount of sufficient amount of vitamin D, which is transferred through the fetus into the throughout the pregnancy. Then there is a strong positive correlation between 25 levels in maternal serum, cord blood, and breast milk. As cord blood concentration represent the neonatal vitamin D stores, their findings is suggestive that the antenatal vitamin D supplementation can increase the vitamin D stores in infants at birth and also even after 6 months of age. The studies mentioned in the studies are Hollis et al. Done in 2011, and in that study, the mean 25 vitamin D in maternal serum and cord blood at the time of delivery is greatest in pregnant women who supplemented with 4,000 international unit of cholecalciferol from daily from 12 to 16 weeks of pregnancy till delivery. And also, and then study Roth et al. Done in 2013 in a double-blind RCT in which mothers were supplemented with either placebo or 35,000 international unit per week of vitamin D during the third trimester, and they have a high level of vitamin D in the cord blood. So, a conclusion, that is, none of the infants born to mothers who received 3 lakh international unit of vitamin D in the antenatal period had severe vitamin deficiency, that is less than 11 nanogram per ml. At 6 months of age, as against 54.3% of the infants born to placebo group developed a severe vitamin D deficiency, and the antenatal supplementation prevented severe vitamin deficiency in infants at 6 months of age. So the recommendation is that the maternal supplementation can be a new prudent approach, which will not only prevent vitamin deficiency in infants but also correct deficiency in mothers. So the limitations were sample size was based on a study with the maternal supplementation of vitamin D during breastfeeding, not during pregnancy. And they did not measure the level of vitamin D in mothers at time of delivery and also at 6 months due to financial constraints. The trial registry of this study was Indian Council of Medical Research Registry, and the ethical clearance is dated at October 21, 2015, and funding done by Indian Council of Medical Research. Then the analysis will be done by my colleague, Dr. Fathima.
Thank you, Dr. Shereena, for explaining clearly the article for us. And we would like to request Dr. Fathima Umar to present the analysis. Over to Dr. Fathima.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, all. Today I'm analyzing the article presented by Dr. Shereena. First, it is about randomized control trial. It's one of the most powerful and most reliable tool of clinical research, and their prospective studies used to measure the effectiveness of intervention or treatment. And critical appraisal of article is a systematic process used to identify the strength and weakness of a research article in order to assess the usefulness and validity of research. Consort were created to assess the high quality presentation of the conducted RCT, which is Consolidated Standards of Reporting Trial. And this consort consists of 25 checklists, which will be discussed further in the upcoming slides. This is a slide showing the 25 checklists. I will go into individually. First is title and abstract section. Is identification as a randomized trial in the title. We can identify it as a randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial in the title section. Next is structured summary of the trial design, methods, results, and conclusion. They were clearly described in the abstract section of this article. Next is in background and objectives, scientific backgrounds and explanation of the rationale, which is in the introduction section, they describe about that, and also about the incidence of vitamin E deficiency and its impact on maternal and infant population. Next is description of a trial design, including allocation ratio. It's a randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial with an allocation ratio of 1:1. Next is important changes to methods after trial commencement. There is no changes after this trial commencement. And the participants, first is eligibility criteria for the participants were clearly mentioned in this section for both the infants as well as for the mother, having both inclusion and exclusion criteria met by them. Settings and location where the data were collected. It's collected from the Department of Pediatrics of a tertiary care teaching hospital in collaboration with the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology and Endocrinology from University College of Medical Science and Guru Tegh Bahadur Hospital, Delhi. Intervention for each group with sufficient details to allow replication, including how and when they were actually administered, were clearly described. After allocating the mothers, blood were drawn from them for analyzing the biochemical parameters like calcium and phosphorus. And after that, they were supplied with either vitamin D or the placebo drug around 5 weeks with the supervision. And after that, cord blood was cultured at the time of birth. And the babies were anthropometrically assessed, and also at 6 months of age, again 3 ml of blood was collected and was analyzed for the biochemical parameters as well as for anthropometric measures and for radiological investigation. Outcomes completely defined pre-specified primary and secondary outcomes, including how and when they were assessed. A primary outcome is clearly mentioned, but no secondary outcomes were pre-specified. Any changes to the trial outcomes after the trial commenced with the reason, no changes were done. How sample size was determined? Sample size was determined based on a study conducted in their own institution by Niigata, in which the lactating mothers were supplemented with the vitamin D instead of the antenatal mothers. Based on that, they concluded the sample size. When applicable, explanation of any interim analysis and stopping guidelines, it's not specified in the study. Randomization, sequence generation. In that section, mother used to generate the random allocation sequence. It's a computer-generated randomization sequence. And type of randomization, details of any restriction, it's by using serial numbered opaque seal envelope known as Snor's technique. Next is allocation concealment mechanism, and that is mechanism used to implement the random allocation sequence, describing any steps taken to conceal the sequence until intervention by assigned. Here in this, the drugs and placebo, which are identical in smell and as well as appearance, were coded from serially coded from 1 to 100 by a third person who is not associated with the study. And further, by using Snor's technique, they are distributed to the participants, and then at the time of completion of the study, they were decoded either as A or B, and then a master chart was prepared, and then the analysis was done. Who generate the random allocation sequence, who enroll the participants, and who assign the participant to intervention. That already mentioned, it's a computer-generated randomization sequence further by using SNOS technique and by a third person who is completely not associated with the study. Next is blinding. If done, who was blinded after assignment to intervention? For example, participants, care providers, or those assessing outcomes, and how. Here it's a double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. Here both the participant as in researcher were blinded to the study. If relevant, description of the similarity of the intervention. Here both the placebo and the vitamin D group having the same intervention. Next is statistical methods. Statistical methods used to compare group for primary and secondary outcomes. The data were analyzed using SPSS version 20, and here the quantitative variables were represented using mean and standard deviation, while the qualitative variables were using the percentage, and the comparison can be used the chi-square test. Methods for additional analysis, such as group analysis and other analysis. Even though they analyzed the biochemical parameters, like including the calcium, phosphorus, that is biochemical rickets and sun index, they were not mentioned in the study. Next is for each group, the number of participants who were randomly assigned received intended treatment and were analyzed for the primary outcome is depicted by a flow diagram. In this diagram, it's clearly mentioned about the number of participants, a number of laws to follow up, number of excluded from the study, and the final outcome. And for each group, losses and exclusions after randomization together with reasons were depicted by a flow diagram. Recruitment. Dates defining the periods of recruitment and follow-up were not given in the study, and why the trial ended or was stopped. Study was not ended abruptly, it was completed. Next is baseline data. A table showing baseline demographic and clinical characteristic of each group were provided in that article. Number analyzed. For each group, number of participants included in each analysis, and the analysis was by original assigned groups were satisfied. Outcomes and estimation. For each primary and secondary outcome, results for each outcome and estimated effect size and its precision. The primary outcome is clearly mentioned. That is, no infants in the vitamin D supplemental group had developed a vitamin D deficiency, while in placebo group, around 88% of the infants had vitamin D insufficiency, and around 60% are vitamin deficiency. There is no mention of any secondary outcome, even though they evaluated the biochemical and radiological rickets. Next is for binary outcome, presentation of both absolute and relative effect is recommended. No binary outcomes is done. Next is ancillary analysis. Result of any other analysis performed, including subgroup analysis, adjusted analysis, distinguishing pre-specified from exploratory, is not mentioned in the article. All important harms or undetected effect in each group. In the study, it was given that around 90% of the evaluated mother at the time of study had found to be vitamin D deficient, but none of the mothers were supplemented, or the infants were supplemented with the vitamin D during the course of the study. Next is trial limitations, addressing sources of potential bias, imprecision, and relevant multiplicity of the analysis. This trial limitation, as by their article, was that the sample was based on maternal supplementation of vitamin D during breastfeeding and not during pregnancy. And the limitation mentioned by them was they didn't measure 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels in mothers at the time of delivery and at 6 months due to financial constraints. Next is generalizability. In this study, we can see that in both vitamin D supplemented group as well as placebo group, the dropout is around nearly 30%. For a study to be internally valid, dropout should be around 20%. So in this case, the validity is questionable. And next, on the basis of this dropout. Next, another important is this study was mainly found out that 90% of women had hypovitaminosis, and this supplementation was done on those population that had hypovitaminosis. So we have to assess and analyze, screen the mothers whether they are hypovitaminosis or normal, whether their vitamin levels before starting this. Next is interpretation consistent with the results of balancing benefits and harms and other considering other relevant evidence. Interpretation is consistent with the results. And harm, we discussed that the vitamin, they were not provided with the vitamin D supplements, even though there is hypovitaminosis. And another limitation, we have found out that in this method, in this trial design, they said that the infant can be allowed to supplement minerals, vitamins, ORS, and other nutrient supplements. But the exact dosage or content of that vitamin D in that supplements were not mentioned. And registration number and name of trial registry. It's by Indian Council of Medical Research Registry, CTR1 2017 12010850. And in where the protocol can be accessed from the Indian Pediatrics, and funding was done by ICMR. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fathima Umar. Or to Dr. Ramankutty.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
First of all, about the presentations, they were very good, and I would like to congratulate both of them. The article is a very straightforward article addressing a very specific issue, and they have done the best possible study on that to solve that or answer that question. So that way, it is a good choice, and both the presenter and the person who analyzed did a good job, except a few things which I will point out. So that way I would like to congratulate both of them. This is a randomized double-blind trial. That is what they have stated in the title. But I would like to add that actually the blinding has been done at 3 levels. 1 is for the patient, so 2 is for the investigator, and 3 is for the statistician, because they have just labeled as A and group B. So he didn't actually know, he or she, whoever it is, did not know whether it is test group or control group. So, I mean, this is just it's not a major point, but sometimes people call this triple blind and all. But if you come across this term, that is the meaning. The statistician was not aware of which group is which. So this is a similar study like that. And they have clearly found a difference, and the analysis is actually what has to be done. They have compared the 2 groups, and they have established that at the beginning they were both similar, and after the administration of the drug or the treatment, whatever is intervention, which is vitamin D for the mother, so then they found that in the babies they were comparable. I mean, they were actually better result in those who received the intervention, which means it is superior. So that is clearly stated, and they have put the p-values. So there is no doubt that it is due to the intervention. So there is no confusion there. So that way it is a very straightforward study. So 1 or 2 things is, one is that the person who, I think Dr. Fathima said that there are no binary results. Actually, it's not true. They have stated the proportion of people who are below, the extreme range, that is below 11 nanograms. So that is a proportion.
Insufficiency and yes.
Binary result. So you could have actually they could have computed a relative measure and a absolute measure. What is the absolute measure? Absolute measure is the difference in proportion between the 2 groups. There is one minus the other. So that is a difference in proportion. What is the relative measure? It is a ratio. So the absolute measure is a difference, and if there is no difference, what you expect is 0 difference, right? So the difference will be 0. So in the absolute measure, the null value is 0. So that is what you look for. Whereas in the relative measure, one over the other, the ratio, when you calculate, what is the null value? The null value is 1, because if both the numerator and denominator are 1, the same, you get the relative the ratio as 1. So that is called the relative risk or risk ratio, whatever. Even odds ratio is a ratio measure, so that you will get 1. 1 is the null value in a ratio measure, and a ratio measure is usually referred to as a what do you call the relative measure, not an absolute measure. So sometimes in clinical situations, the relative measure is important. Sometimes the absolute measure is important, especially when you are looking for the size of the effect. Then you have to look for the absolute measure. Whereas when you are looking for the effect of an intervention, probably, or the effect of what is a risk factor, etc., you probably look for the relative measure. So that is the technicality about those two aspects, which I hope you understand. If you have any question, you can ask. So I think that's all I want to mention. Otherwise, it's very straightforward. Then Dr. Manju had asked me about one or two things. One is what is a whisk box and whisker plot, and also Shapiro-Wilks test for normality. I will just mention, first of all, Shapiro-Wilks is a statistical test. Suppose you have some data, and most of the tests that we apply assume that the data is normally distributed, like your t-test and your regression and ANOVA. Everything assumes that data is normally distributed, but you have to check whether that assumption is true, and for that you use what is known as Shapiro-Wilks test, and you get a statistic called the W. Just like the T statistic, you have a W. And but here one thing is that Shapiro-Wilks, the null hypothesis is that it is normally distributed. So you want the null hypothesis not to be rejected. Usually in every situation, you want the null hypothesis to be rejected. But when you're testing for normality, you don't want the null hypothesis to be rejected. So the p-value in the Shapiro-Wilks test should be more than 0.05. So that is what you want when you want to confirm that it is a normally distributed variable. And if it is not normally distributed, you go in for what are known as non-parametric tests, like your Wilcoxon, etc., etc. So that is a technicality. And the box and whisker plot, I can show you one. If you I can share my screen. I can do that. I will just search for it and I can explain that.
Yes.
Can you see this?
Yes,
You
sir.
see?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
we can
this
see
is
this.
what the box and whisker plot is. I will try to expand it. So this is called the box. This rectangle is called the box. And then you have a line in the middle, and then you have two tails, and these are called the whiskers. For some reason, they are called whiskers. So the
Maybe they
lower,
represent.
uh,
They look like the
you
mustache,
can
no,
call
sir.
it tail or whisker or whatever. So the lower limit means the minimum value, and the upper limit shows the maximum value of the whole data, and this one shows the median. So this is just about distribution. So take one look at it, that you know whether it is normal or is very different from normal. Because if it is normal, this line representing the median will be somewhere in the middle. So which means it is roughly normal. That's all it means. So this is an example. Is not from this data. Some other example. And then what is this? You have a lower quartile and an upper quartile. Lower quartile means that 25% of your data is below this lower quartile. Okay, the upper quartile means it is 75th percentile, which means 25% of your data is above this upper quartile. So in the middle, within the box, you have 50% of your data. So this is the box and whisker plot, which is used to test normality and to look at the distribution. And sometimes you have what is known as an outlier. You may be one outlier or several outliers, which means that there is some convention that you take 1.5 into the interquartile distance, and if the data point is beyond that, you consider it as an outlier. These are technical statistical details which you need not know, but you should know that outlier means it's something beyond what you expect. So that the importance of that is sometimes it may be just an error in the data entry. Suppose you are entering height and instead of you forget one decimal point, that will come up as an outlier, because it will be like a 2-digit number will become a 3-digit number. So that will be an outlier. So you immediately know there is something there, and either it may be a true outlier or it may be a mistake in your data entry or something. That is why you need to look at the distribution of your data before you start your analysis. That is all that is the important.
Sir, one doubt, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, in this picture, the lower whisker is lengthier than the upper whisker, no, sir? So that can happen.
Yeah,
No, sir? That
sometimes
depends
it
on
can
the.
happen. So this is a matter of judgment. If you think that that is very long and it is not normal, you can take it as not normal. But that is there is no rule like that. So we expect something very symmetrical, but now, as you point out, this is slightly asymmetrical. So either you can say it is very, I don't accept this is normal, and you go for non-parametric tests, or you can say this is okay. I mean, it's not really that different from normal, so I will go with the normal usual tests. So that is your judgment. So that you have to defend it when somebody points it out. You may have to defend why you did that. So that's all. Otherwise, it's okay. Of course, there are more formal tests, but usually people don't go in for that. Just you're satisfied with box and whisker plot. Okay. So these are the questions that I think Dr. Anju raised. And if any further questions are there, you can.
That the correlation between 25-hydroxy D levels and other variables was reported as a Spearman correlation coefficient.
Yeah, that is right. Again, correlation, the correlation between two variables. When you look at correlation, you have to, it is usually it is between two numerical variables, two variables which are expressed as numbers, either continuous numbers or integers like that. So a correlation means that there is when one goes up, the other goes up or down. So which means if a correlation of 1 means that there's a perfect correlation. As A goes up, B also goes up. That is known as positive correlation. But if A goes up and B goes down, that is like it is a negative correlation. Suppose you look at height and weight; they are usually positively correlated, right? So when the height goes up, your weight also goes up. But there are some certain other things, like when your weight goes up, your HDL cholesterol generally goes down. So that may be negatively correlated. So that there are several variables like that. But these are not perfect correlations. So they will lie between 0 and +1 or 0 and -1, depending on whether it is positive or negative. So if it is nearer 0 means there is no correlation. Like if it is like 0.01 or something like that, you can say these variables are not correlated. So what is Spearman's correlation? It is just a non-parametric correlation. Like the usual correlation you do is assuming that these two variables are normally distributed. In which case you can calculate what is known as Pearson's correlation coefficient, which is the one we usually use, and it is much discussed in the literature. The Pearson, Pearson.
Yes, sir. Yes.
But if you think that this is not normally distributed, the alternative is to use the Spearman's correlation, and the Pearson's correlation coefficient is usually designated as R, that is usual small r. And whereas the Spearman's coefficient, which doesn't assume, and it is based on ranking. Suppose the whole thing can be ranked, and you think that ranks are very similar in two groups, then it is correlation based on Spearman. And Spearman's correlation coefficient usually called rho, RHO. I think it is a Greek letter or something. So it is either Pearson's R or Spearman's rho. So that is all. It's not nothing very complicated. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for that enlightenment. Yes. And I would like to request Dr. Elizabeth, madam, who is present in the audience right now, to share madam's view, madam. I think madam has heard the presentations, and over to Dr. Elizabeth, madam.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Anju.
Good evening, madam. Good evening, madam.
So the presenters were very, very confident, and they were presenting at a stretch, so they have prepared well, and they have done a good job. So there are, as Dr. Ramankutty has also pointed out, it was an ICMR funded study. So there are certain learning curves and some doubts also which I have regarding this. I think I'll voice it. That is, one is that the learning curve is that if iron, if the mother is sufficient, the baby can have enough store for 6 months. So that is a big learning curve, I think we have, no? And one of the authors, Dr. Faridi and all team, thinks that it is not good to drug a baby every day when the baby is exclusively breastfed. That is why they are doing all these things, no? the first study they did was that, because I was interacting with him, the author, Dr. Faridi and team. So the first study they did was that 60K vitamin D will be given to the mother at birth, then 1.5, 2.5, 3.5 months immunization. And the mother is supposed to transfer it to the baby. So that is their study. Now they say that even if the enough store is there in the mother, the baby, up to 6 months, these babies were not supplemented, but still they maintained that levels and they didn't go to hypovitaminosis. So that is one learning curve which we have. Then the second, the doubt is that the NNF guidelines and all to give vitamin D to all babies came after the IAC approval of this study. 2015, the IAC was given. Due to COVID and all this, there is a large delay, huge delay in publishing. So was it appropriate to keep the mothers, knowing that the mothers are having hypervitaminosis, is it ethical to not to supplement them? And the baby also was not supplemented. Ideally, I think they should have gone back to the IEC and told all these things and would have reworked on the methodology. So that is one concern which I have. Then they say that they took the sample size calculation and they added 30% attrition rate, 20%, everything they added, and they got the numbers. But in their study, the sample size was calculated based on their own study of lactating mothers, not on pregnant mothers. So, but there are pregnant mothers' data is available in the literature. So whether they would have gone for that, that is one thing. Then next query I have is that 30% dropout was there. So in any study, we usually say no, not more than 20% is acceptable. So even though they added more numbers because of their stringent criteria of inclusion of newborns. If a newborn had hyperbilirubinemia, premature delivery, phototherapy, like that, they excluded. So finally, they ended up with excluding 30%. So whether that 30% would have influenced the results is one. So another thing I want to say is that whether this article, if any one of us had put it up, would this have been accepted? Is there politics in it? So these are my thoughts, which I am sharing. Okay, I think Dr.
Thank you so much, madam. Yes, madam. I think most of the questions are
another thing another thing which I learned is that sun exposure to the baby is not sufficient to produce vitamin D levels, but maternal stores are good enough till 6 months. So these are the 2 points which we can learn from this. Anyway, a good exercise. Okay.
Thank you, madam. But I think the madam's queries
Gopika has mentored it also very well. Okay.
Yes, madam. Madam's queries are more of the methodology type of questions. So I would like to request Dr. Ramankutty sir to comment first on madam's.
I didn't quite, I mean, one of the things she pointed out is the ethical aspect, which is a concern. But see, if there is what they say is that when it comes before an ethics committee, if there is what is known as clinical equipoise, that is, you don't know the answer. If you don't know the answer, if you know already that if you supplement the mother, the baby will be better, then probably you should not have done the study. So that is for the ethics committee to decide. But obviously they decided there is a question there. So that can be answered only by doing the study. So that is the problem, which comes before, whether the chicken and egg problem like that. But common sense tells us that if you supplement the mother, baby will be benefited. So why did you do the study? That is one very reasonable question. I think a person like Dr. Elizabeth will definitely ask. So she was not there in the ethics committee, so they got away with it. So that's all I can say. So as long as, so that is true. So then they should have at least said that when they found out that the babies were deficient, what did they do? They should have supplemented the mother. Probably the ethics committee suggested that. I don't know that. when you find that.
And 5 babies developed biochemical or clinical rickets, no?
Rickets.
Radiological rickets.
Yeah,
That is also of concern.
that is definitely not a very good thing. So these are usually when you come to clinical trials, these are the kind of questions which are asked. When you do, if you already know the answer, why should you do such studies just for publication, etc.? So that is a major concern, and I share that concern definitely.
I think, thank you, sir. Madam, shall we ask Dr.
Dr.
Gopika to comment on?
Padmanabhan, sir.
Dr. Padmanabhan, sir. Sir.
Okay. Now, I'm not very expert in telling about the methodology, but I would like to state some statements here. Number one, you see, now we are all giving vitamin D to newborns, and we think it is a standard practice everywhere. The Indian government does not say that very well. The IAP recommends 400 international units up to 1 year, and above 1 year, it is acceptable but not must. Therefore, it's almost routine now for all pediatricians to write 400 international units to newborn babies. It has come about like that. But then when you look at the need for it, you go into the study, you will find at the end of the day, when you give zinc for gastroenteritis or vitamin D in these patients, they are nutrients. They will be beneficial in any population in which it is deficient. Now, here is a study which is done with 90% of the population being deficient in vitamin D and about 60% being very severe deficiency in the mother. So definitely whatever you do will be of benefit to the population. But the question is generalizability, whether we can accept it all over India, leave alone all over the world. And you must understand that countries like Canada, which has very low sunlight, has now said no, there's no vitamin D deficiency there. They are not going to give vitamin D routinely. So, I'm sorry, zinc for gastroenteritis, they are not going to give. That's number one. Number two, it is not very clear whether these children who were born were given vitamin D in the first 6 months. They said they gave minerals. Did it include vitamin D also? Because that's one thing which we give now most of the pediatricians may not write other vitamins. They don't fail to write vitamin D. Was it withheld from these children? If it is so, then it is really definitely unethical. That's what I believe. Now, you must understand that the IAP recommends vitamin D. The WHO makes Dr. Elizabeth would be able to tell me. If you go into the statement, I had gone into a depth of it and did what you call a blog long about 4 years ago during the COVID time. I was surprised that WHO says education of the mothers, education of the this one, but doesn't categorically say that you should give vitamin D for all newborns. And definitely the Indian government doesn't say that also, but the IAP says. Am I right? Dr. Elizabeth can correct me in this.
Yes, you are right.
And then, but I have found that after coming back from Gulf, all the pediatricians from wherever they are trained, they write vitamin D, and I also write, definitely. Now, whether it is useful, a little doubtful. Now, I have to say one more thing. If you are a little worried about giving medicines during antenatal period and decide to supplement the mother during lactation, is of no benefit. They say if you give 1,000 units of vitamin A to the mother, vitamin D, the breast milk increases by only 10 units. Therefore, lactating mothers given vitamin D because you are afraid to give vitamin D to any unnecessary medicines to pregnant women doesn't work that way. The best thing is to give the newborn. Why go after this? Number three, you will understand. Some people will say, let's give vitamin D to antenatal mothers because it has got other activities like hypertension, basically about preeclamptic toxemia. Is it that word is not used now? I'm not sure. About the hypertension, which we used to read. But WHO has categorically said that that should not be an indication to give vitamin D to pregnant women. Now, the dose that is given is very high, 6,000. It is, they are giving 6,000 units for 5 doses. That is 30,000 units to the vitamin D to the mother. Now, as Dr. Sheeja had asked, whether it produces any hypervitaminosis in the mother. Probably not in this group because most of them were very highly deficient. But if you start doing it in well-nourished mothers and who have normal vitamin D, I don't know whether this dose can ever be considered. And the question is, why did they go into it rather than thinking of just giving vitamin D to the children? That's my point.
We have done some vitamin D estimation in children who come from the Gulf countries. No, they don't have sun exposure because it's so hot outside. They don't go out. But maybe because all the formula and infant cereals are fortified, they are not deficient. But our children are still deficient. So that lifestyle also matters. And our country is not having fortified. So that may be the reason why all the pediatricians took up the plea of NNF and IAP that we should supplement to the babies. And as it was mentioned, 100 ml of milk, whether it is human or animal milk, will give only 4 units of vitamin D. So to get 400, they may have to 10 liters and all they will have to drink. So obviously from breast milk, how far it will be sufficient is also another query.
Small thing I would like to say about the Gulf, because I stayed there for 27 years. I used to wonder why should there ever be vitamin D deficiency in this one. But most of the Western literature said that it is vitamin D levels are very low in adult women, low backache, everything is due to vitamin D. Till I don't know why, suddenly after some time, we started getting hypocalcemic tetany in newborn period. And they had very low vitamin D. That means there was very high vitamin D deficiency in those mothers. And then they brought about a thing telling that everybody should be given vitamin D at home, 400 units. And now there is sunlight outside, you can't go out because it's very, very hot. Therefore, naturally, they started supplementing. Therefore, but in adult women, because they are covered,
they're dressing.
Very much covered. They, the Badus there, if you look at it, I don't know how they tolerate it. They wear dark clothes, completely covered head to foot. And in this hot weather, they live, and therefore they have rickets. They have problem of during delivery, it seems their pelvis becomes malformed, etc. has been reported very much. Now, tetany was something which was in between it came, and the Ministry of Health in Oman gave a very clear that every newborn should be given vitamin D, etc. And then, of course, it came down dramatically.
Now, I would like to request Dr. Gopika Madam, who is a mentor and the consultant from Ananthapuri Hospital, who has been training the PGs and have selected the article, to say a few words. Or to Dr. Gopika.
Thank you, Anju. First of all, I would like to thank Ramankutty sir, Elizabeth Madam, Padmanabhan sir for particularly analyzing this and sharing their viewpoints. I also share the same thoughts about this article. Actually, we chose this article as a learning point for the PGs because the structure, the randomization, double blinding, everything is, they have done it perfectly. But the article content, that has no value at this presently. Actually, they have registered it in 2017. Maybe there were, at that time, there were not many studies regarding this vitamin D supplementation and the deficiency in newborns and this thing. But once the guidelines has come in 2017, they should have revised their objectives. So they could have done whether vitamin D screening was as a objective in mothers, whether to see if it was deficient or not. And they also identified that, as said in the data, 90% of mothers were deficient. And once they have identified that, they were depriving the infants of vitamin D. That was, I think it is a harm they have done. And of which the 5 children have developed rickets, and both biochemical and radiological rickets. So that is the PGs should know that they should be truthful. And throughout the article, we searched for the year. Actually, 7 years have been done. When did they do the study? Actually, it was registered in 2017. They have not mentioned about the study period. So when did they do the study? When did they came out with the results? That is not mentioned. So that is also it's a learning point for the PGs that they should revise their criteria once a guideline, once they have subjected the protocol and once a guideline has come, they should revise the protocol. One thing is that, and then another thing is that they have come out with this thing that expose after the sun index. There has been no change
Yes.
with their body when the babies have been exposed to sun. I think that is actually the studies say that when exposed to sun, there should be at least some difference, and that they could have done as a subgroup analysis. Those who received vitamin D and those who have not received vitamin D, is there any change in the sun exposure like that? Then one, as Sheeja has rightly pointed out, that they have taken X-ray of both both the hands to identify rickets. So once they have already said that serum ALKP value more than 420, they have considered as biochemical rickets, and they have got it as biochemical rickets. Then why they again took the X-ray of all the vitamin D sufficient group and the placebo group? All the children were exposed to radiation also. So these and all, these are all the points. I think we should be highlighted, and when we ourselves do a study, that what all things we should not do. We should not do any harm when we are doing an RCT. But the RCT
Thank you so much, madam.
structure was perfect, and the randomization, how they gave the how we can replicate the intervention, everything was done. But the content and the significance now, everyone, so many studies, and that is one another thing. Many studies are there. They themselves have quoted 2 studies, Roth et al. And Harris. Both of them, the sample size is very high, 494 for Roth et al. And Harris, it is 164. And in spite they have these studies, they took their study from at their own institution, Naik et al., who conducted the study among lactating mothers. So actually, previous studies were there. So they could have, sample size could have been calculated from one of those studies.
Thank you, Dr. Gopika, madam. There are 2 queries in the chat box, madam. Shall I read it, madam? Madam, the first question is, did the study also look for any evidence of hypervitaminosity in the mother and any serious deleterious effects of hypercalcemia in the neonate?
No, they have not done, they did not look in the mother's blood sample for hypervitaminosis, and also they have not done any calcium creatine ratio or hypercalcemia.
Yes, madam. That question was asked by Dr. Sheeja. And now Dr. Sheeja asks, is it ethically proper to subject the babies to radiography to identify rickets when alkaline phosphates level would have given the answer? Also, share the concern that they were ahead with the study, withholding treatment to deficient babies. I think the second part has been addressed. Yeah. Madam, regarding the study, madam, I was also looking for the sentence that both the arms were given vitamin D, but that sentence was not seen anywhere in the.
They could have done like that, both
is,
arms given vitamin
yes.
D, and what is the difference in sun or whether they screening of vitamin D among antenatal mothers. But once this article is published,
madam,
no, what is
madam, I read about. Yes.
Was vitamin D given in newborn period to the placebo group?
No, vitamin D, those children who
No, sir. No, sir.
excluded. Those children in the placebo group whom they identified as having mothers with the hypovitaminosis were deprived of vitamin D.
And those mothers who were given these supplements, their children were given or not given?
No.
Both were not given.
Both were not given.
Both were not given. But the guidelines was out. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't.
Because in 2017, the guidelines came out. It was published in the.
Madam is telling. Elizabeth Madam is telling that.
2017 Indian Pediatrics test came out guideline.
And this study was done came out after that only.
When was the study done? We don't know. That year they have not at all mentioned in the article. And the ethical clearance was done in 2015, I think, and the trial registry has done in 2017.
So in 2017, the IAP came about with the guideline that 400
Guidelines.
units should be given to all
Yes.
units, is it?
Yeah. Kadalkar sir came out with the
Yeah, but it's an IAP guideline, but the Indian government never came out with it. They are very ambiguous about it. WHO has not come out with it. I was surprised actually. All textbooks say this, but the WHO, Indian government has not come out with that. And
Yes, sir.
about older children, it's surprising that as the children age from infants to the national study in 2000, Dr. Elizabeth is there, she would know. The increases actually is 4 to 6% in infants, then it becomes 15%. By about late adolescents, is 25%. We expect it to come down because they go out into the sun when they get older, but it's the other way around. And we learn in our schools that sunlight, vitamin D comes. But the point is that you have to get exposed between 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And if you are exposing your 25% exposure, that means you require about 20 minutes, the other require half an hour. Therefore, this much exposure is required. But I think that must be there in North India. And I don't know why there is so much deficiency with increasing age.
Sir, is there any guidelines by AAP telling that infants should not be exposed to sunlight or things like? Is there anything like that, sir? Or is it a part of a guideline regarding the neonatal jaundices?
I am not sure about
because
it.
I just
they are very much concerned about skin cancer and all that. They have it. But
yes, sir.
Vitamin D is advised even in AAP. There's no doubt about it.
Regarding what is there any recommendation for older children, like sir, from 1 to 18 years or something? We know about till 1 year and that. So should we supplement the older children also? Is there any recommendation like that? I was just wondering. Because sir's blog, I was reading sir's blog also. So sir has been mentioning a chart where 1 to 18 years also vitamin D is recommended.
600 units are advised by Pediatric Endocrinology Society. Many societies have recommended. But our IAP, I don't think has taken it up. IAP has only said up to 1 year. And therefore, normally nobody gives it. That's what it happens. And you must understand one thing that now we say about rickets and whether suppose you do a vitamin D, 25 hydroxy vitamin D, and the patient's level comes down low. Nowadays, many doctors are doing it in private. They give pharmacological doses to treat it. Really, is it indicated? No. The answer is you can give the regular dose, try for 3 months with dietary advice. If the patient is completely asymptomatic, he has no biochemical rickets, so there's no evidence that you should give pharmacological doses. But about 100% of pediatricians, I don't know whether Dr. Elizabeth is there. Normally, I have...
Dr. Gopika madam can contribute actually. Sir was telling about treatment of insufficiency not amounting to rickets, madam.
Yeah. So
now even not only insufficiency, even deficiency when there's no symptoms. You can have a
diagnosis. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, sir, that 2017 guideline says that we need to treat only severe deficiency, that is less than 11. And between insufficiency, only if they have symptoms, we should test them for vitamin D. And it is not prudent to give this high doses of vitamin D also. It is better to give a low dose daily for a total of 5 weeks than to give this weekly high dose because of more chance of nephrocalcinosis and hypercalcemia.
Yes.
So I think now it is better to give a low dose, that is below the tolerable upper limit, and daily for a period of 5 weeks if they have severe deficiency.
Along with calcium, no? Along
with calcium. And for 1 to 18 years, 600 international units.
Yes, ma'am. Anybody from audience can also contribute.
I would like everybody to read my blog.
Sir, if you're possible, can you please type the link in the, that chat box, sir?
Yeah, I will do that here. Let me see whether I can.
Dr. Ramankutty, sir, is there anything more to add? If nothing is there, we can actually think of winding up, sir.
Nothing to add from my part. I agree with Dr. Gopika that it is a good example to show students, how a clinical trial should be done. But the content-wise, there are a lot of questions, ethics, also from to what extent you can generalize All these things are problematic, but such papers do come up.
Gopika madam, I have read that vitamin D is teratogenic in the first and second trimester. Maybe that may be one of the reasons.
They have given, actually, calcium transfer occurs in the third trimester. No, so all the studies they have given only after the first trimester. This they have given in after 32 weeks only. Last trimester.
Okay.
Why don't you go to school girls and just give them vitamin D and make them sufficient? Anyway, now I have given my reference here. It's in the chat box.
Yes, sir's blog is there in the chat box. I mean, Dr. Gopika madam, it is a very useful, text for even reading for the postgraduates and or even understanding the basic things. Gopika madam, don't you think that different labs are giving different cutoffs for insufficiency and deficiency?
But now the standard is this, what they have taken up only less than 11 to 20 and more than 20. And toxic level more than half that. Now I
can say a few sentences on that. It's a question is what is normal? How do you say what is normal? You see, when do you say it is deficient? See, some people have used the level at which the alkaline phosphatase is increased. Some have used the bone density. Therefore, that's why there is a difference in the below 20. About 20, there's no reason, according to some people, to maintain vitamin D. But, the Endocrine Society, I don't know whether they have changed it, is much higher. 50 to 70 is insufficient. Above 77 is normal. Below 37 to below 37.5, they consider as very severe. Therefore, there is a lot of difference in the Endocrinological Society of America's recommendation. But as far as Madam said correctly, most of the others, it is this 12, and therefore that's what we go by. It's better to go by. I have discussed this in detail. There are fundamental two questions. Is it necessary to give vitamin D to all newborns? Because if you are in a country in which you are sure the mother is not deficient, you do. And is it necessary to give beyond 1 year? That's one question. Number question is asymptomatic low vitamin D. Should you be giving the normal dose or should you be giving pharmacological dose? That's just 2 points I've discussed on that blog with all the literature reference, but that was at least 3 or 4 years old. Multiple change would have happened after that. These are things which are not answered because I have found that many pediatricians, they do vitamin D in the course of many things, and whenever they do vitamin D, they give pharmacological doses. Okay.
Sir, sir, could you explain why you have chosen 3 months as a trial, sir? Or even not even 12 weeks? Sir, when the deficiency occurs or insufficiency occurs, sir has told that you give a trial before going for pharmacological treatment. 3 months, sir, allows, no?
Yeah, that is because they say by that time when you give the normal vitamin D 300 units and you are given adequate diet, you are giving it adequate time for it to the vitamin D to come back to normal. But if it doesn't come back to normal, it is unlikely to come back to normal. And most of the literature says that after 3 months, you can give the pharmacological dose. That's what I've read in the literature. That's why I used to practice this. This was, very, very... and another thing is, please write vitamin D, D3 or D2, not 1-alpha-calcidol or 125-hydroxyvitamin D. That's very, very important. I found some pediatricians write 1-alpha-calcidol also. That should not be written as a treatment for prophylaxis.
Okay, sir. So shall we wind up, sir?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
So in the absence of Dr. Benno, I would like to thank Dr. Gopika for selecting a wonderful article and training the two postgraduates excellently well, and for the brilliant presentation by Dr. Shereena R and Dr. Fathima Umar for the presentation as well as the analysis, and Dr. Ramankutty sir for teaching us a lot in the today's session, and Dr. Elizabeth madam who has offered her valuable comments, and our teacher and Chief Coordinator, Dr. Padmanabhan sir. So I thank you all, Dr. Sheeja, Dr. Sheeja, and all the persons, doctors, dignitaries in the audience. And till we meet again, we will call today, and have a great time. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Bye bye. Good night.